The entirety of Pokemon Gold and Silver versions can fit on a 2 MB cartridge. That's all Game Freak needed to craft a legendary adventure, whose remakes are often considered the peak of what the series has to offer. The original games celebrated their 25th anniversary in November 2024, and the day I'm uploading this marks 15 years since Heart Gold and Soul Silver released in the United States. I received my own copy of Silver for Christmas in the year 2000, and its sounds and images would quickly become permanently etched into my mind. I wasn't the type of kid that would mash my way through the game's text. I needed to know everything, and by handing my Atomic Purple Game Boy Color to my dad every time I encountered a word I wasn't familiar with, I was fluently reading before starting kindergarten. When a new generation is released today, longtime fans will inevitably compare its region, narrative, and new Pokemon to what they already know. In contrast to this modern perspective, Gold and Silver were direct upgrades to the original Red and Green experience. Nearly every feature was brought back and improved in some way, and the new Pokemon were teased as early as the first episode of the anime. This was, at one point, the only sequel to the global phenomenon. This is Pocket Monsters 2. With a multitude of time-based systems built around the game's internal clock, it is just as much Animal Crossing daily social simulation as it is Dragon Quest role-playing game. So many Pokemon were designed with varied and interesting play in mind. The designers made these choices without stressing too much about competitive balance, although that had some smart improvements as well. Its setting, the Johto region, has its influences immediately recognizable to a Japanese audience. This vast new land is mostly based on Kansai, an area of Japan a few hours west from Tokyo and the real-life Kanto region. According to designer and composer Junichi Masuda, the kanji he would choose for Johto means castle capital. Kansai is filled with rigorously reconstructed versions of these historic buildings. In my previous video, I declared my primary goal in coming to Japan is to climb Mount Fuji. It wouldn't be as exciting if I just went straight there. I wanted to make a real adventure out of this, so I resolved to travel to the iconic landmarks that inspired my favorite region. Bulbapedia has an extremely in-depth article with all of the locations explained. This isn't just about checking off a list though. The food, animals, and history are all a massive part of what influenced these games. Throughout my nearly 30 years on this planet, Pokemon has pushed me to explore new possibilities, challenge and evolve myself, and connect with others around the world. The people that carved out these relics of the past, the game designers who were inspired by them, me who sought the origins of my childhood fascination, and you who chose to watch this video today. We all dance in time to the same golden sun, the same silver moon. After taking 2 days to recover from my flight to Japan, I was already off to the first location. New Barktown is geographically based on the city of Hamamatsu, located in Shizuoka Prefecture. It's a little far from where I'll be living in Osaka, so I needed to ride the Shinkansen for about an hour and a half to get there. I filled up on curry udon at the station, and just as I was about to take off, I checked my phone and saw the news that the legendary Akira Toriyama had passed away. The designs in both Dragon Ball and Dragon Quest were highly influential on Pokemon's original illustrator Ken Sugimori. I don't think either of us were expecting to start the journey on this somber note. His legacy was on my mind throughout my entire first weekend in Japan. Rest in peace to one of the most influential artists of the modern day. In the words of Eiichiro Oda, may heaven be the joyous world just as you envisioned it. I spent the train ride listening to the Chrono Trigger soundtrack, watching the scenery outside turn from city to country, then back to city again. The train station was a lot bigger than I was expecting, but it makes sense as Hamamatsu is the prefecture's largest city. New Barktown's slogan is Winds of a New Beginning, although I wasn't expecting it so literally. It was the type of wind that feels like it's gonna knock you down, and it would not stop for my entire time visiting. First, we're going to Hamamatsu Castle. There's no in-game equivalent to this location, but if I'm being completely honest, Johto's first 2 cities are somewhat bland compared to the rest of the region. It is the castle capital though, so it felt right to start the journey here. There's a bronze statue of Tokugawa Ieyasu outside. prior to becoming one of the most influential shoguns in Japanese history, he lived here for over a decade, fighting and winning many battles over that time. The castle was originally constructed in 1532, although this current version was actually built in 1958. You'll hear that a lot in this video, considering how so many of these castles were destroyed in various wars and natural disasters over the years. The building itself is rather small, but it's filled with historical artifacts. There's also an area up top that you can look out at the city, although the wind was twice as bad while I was up there. I was genuinely concerned that my phone would fly out of the stabilizer and get lost down below. I spent some more time walking around the castle grounds afterwards, where I had my first wild encounter. The public transportation system is very efficient, as expected of Japan, and I headed down to the southern coast of the city to see one of its most beautiful places. Just before I got there, I noticed there was a place called Windmill Park right next to it. In Heart Gold and Soul Silver, New Barktown was given some windmills, so I knew I had to find at least one while visiting Hamamatsu. I guess a little birdie was looking out for me today. Finally, I made my way across the Nakatajima sand dunes. It wasn't easy with the strong gusts pushing on me, but I got to the shore in time to watch the perfect sunset. This was the moment that everything about this trip became real. My life in Japan and my goal to travel to all these different places. I took a second to think about the last time I saw the ocean like this, and it reminded me of when I was living in Korea. 1 year ago, I was staring out at the sea between these two countries, not knowing that a whole new adventure was waiting for me on the other side. My body was still adjusting to the new time zone, and by 7 p.m. I was completely exhausted and ready for bed. I picked up some sushi and a sandwich from a convenience store and went to sleep ASAP so that I could be ready for tomorrow's city. Bundled up to protect myself from another blustery day, I headed back to Hamamatsu Station. After a traditional Japanese breakfast known as Makudo Naruto, I set off by train towards our next spot. In between New Barktown and Cherrygrove City lies Johto's Route 29. Because I'm not always going to be traveling directly between locations, we won't be covering every single route, but it all lined up as we made our way to the second city. Bulbapedia has a few different locations listed for what could possibly be Cherrygrove City, so I made the decision to visit Nagoya, the capital city of Aichi Prefecture. Aichi is primarily known for two things: flower cultivation and its unique style of making miso. Nagoya is Japan's third most populous metropolitan area, with much more to do than could ever be possible in a single afternoon. I got off the train a few stops before Nagoya Station so I could get to the first spot as quickly as possible. Atsuta Jingu is one of the many shrines I'll be visiting in this video. Originally founded over 1900 years ago, it currently sees over 9 million visitors annually. The main reason I stopped by was to see the sacred sword, Kusanagi no Tsurugi, which is one of the 3 imperial treasures of Japan. When I approached the main shrine, I was asked to stop filming. I didn't know this when I arrived. It's so important that they keep it hidden away from the public. Its most recent appearance was in 2019, present but wrapped up when Emperor Naruhito ascended to the throne. I bowed to pay my respects, then headed to the park to see some flowers. Even in early March, signs of spring were beginning to show. I don't mind that my timing for proper Hanami was a little off, since figuring these things out for myself is what makes it fun. I decided to take a quick stroll through the park, filming any flowers I could find. Suddenly, I started noticing some unique fashion choices. As I kept going, I started seeing characters I recognized. There must have been a cosplay meetup happening in Tsuruma Park because the more I walked, the more groups and photo shoots I saw. I had no clue this was happening today, making it a pleasant surprise for the video. It started to rain as I made my way towards the back end of the park, and after seeing a street cat try to find shelter, I knew I should probably head inside as well. I was really just looking to find something close by, so I decided to wait it out in a local Indian restaurant. There's a lot of great Indian and Nepalese spots like this in Japan, though I consider not getting Aichi's famous miso for lunch my first miss of the project. Afterwards, I headed towards Nagoya Castle, our last stop in the city before heading home. When I eventually found the entrance to the subway, I was only a few stops from where I wanted to go. Once I resurfaced above ground, the sun had come back out and I was able to take a quick walk through the shops and stalls outside the castle grounds. Nagoya Castle is much larger than what we saw in Hamamatsu, and it was abandoned between 1582 and 1609. As shogun, Tokugawa Ieyasu ordered it to be repaired. I spent a lot of time walking around expecting to find an entrance for admission. However, similar to the sacred sword at Atsuta Shrine, I did not know that the interior was inaccessible to the public. Don't worry, this video will have no shortage of castles for us to explore. And just like that, the first Johto excursion had come to an end, with 2 cities already explored. The ride home to Osaka gave me a lot of time to think about how excited I was to see this project come to life. With my new teaching job starting a few days later, I knew it'd be some time before I could make it to the next stop. It only costs a few bucks to take the train to Nara, a city dearly beloved by tourists and Japanese alike. Although I went stag on this trip, I ended up being very fond of what I saw there. Violet City is where the traditional charm of Johto truly begins to reveal itself, and the weather was perfect when I visited its real-world equivalent. You have a very limited window to see cherry blossoms in Japan. Around here, they're already on their way out by mid-April. Walking through the city, you'll notice a distinct lack of colorful shops and restaurants. There are specific rules regarding the way buildings can be painted in Nara, as well as Kyoto, which we'll get to a little later. This is reflected in-game by the Pokémon Center and Mart having different colored roofs. What you'll find instead is imagery of the city's darling deer almost everywhere you look. We'll get to these hooved herbivores soon enough. First, we need to stop by somewhere fans will surely recognize. This is Kofukuji, a World Heritage Site established in the year 669. It is the second largest pagoda in Japan and one of Nara's most iconic structures. Although you won't find any Bellsprout sporting sages here, it clearly inspired the game's first completable dungeon, Violet City's Sprout Tower. These days, the temple itself is usually under construction, but the architecture's resemblance is still clear. It had me wondering what it must have been like to play this for the first time, fully aware of these real-world connections. I passed through the remaining cherry blossoms and made my way over to Noborioji Park. This is the best weather I had for the entire project. The first half of April is the perfect time to walk around in Japan. It's only gonna get hotter from here. There's a reason that you could only find Stantler in the games between Violet and Ecruteak. You don't want to meet Nara's deer empty-handed, though you'll have no trouble finding some Shika Senbei to feed them. These critters are all over the place trying to chow down. With Japanese tourism hitting record highs, the deer are definitely not going hungry. They've truly learned to live among humans. When you feed them, they bow their heads in respect since they know some gratitude might get them another cracker. I know they're just looking to fill their bellies, but I think it's really sweet that the relationship between deer and humans has grown to be like this over hundreds of years. I didn't see it for myself, but I've heard that they're smart enough to obey crosswalk signals as well. I also noticed this very brave duck hanging out and enjoying the vibes. The whole stampede? Oh my god, there's so many! I continued to walk around among the deer, who are everywhere. You cannot get away from them, although it didn't make my stroll through the forest any less peaceful. Except for this baby, who would not stop shrieking. I moseyed my way over to another World Heritage Site, Kasuga Taisha, although it was packed and I didn't plan on staying long. Still, I'll always enjoy seeing these old shrines and monuments, even if I don't know the history of every single one. Just experiencing it in terms of imagery and vibes, rather than intellectualizing things through historic knowledge, can also be a rewarding way to travel. At any rate, I was out of there as quickly as I came in before stopping by Nara Park to sit down and take a quick rest. This is such an interesting city with its own identity. It's only natural that you'd use it for inspiration when making a game set in a fictionalized version of Japan. I don't think the deer crackers would have been very tasty if I tried them myself, but they looked like pancakes, so that made me want a snack of my own. On my way out, I grabbed one of Nara's specialties, yomogi mochi. The train ride back was just as beautiful, giving me one last moment of peace before heading back to reality and preparing for a Saturday teaching shift the next day. I was so excited to go exploring again, and if you know the Johto region as well as I do, you won't be surprised to hear that we've got a dark and mysterious path ahead of us. Although they're not necessary to complete the game, the ruins of Alph are very hard to miss, and one of the game's areas that does so much with so little. Crystal version added some more things to do with these wall puzzles, but there isn't some grand side quest here. And outside of the ability to print stickers, there isn't really any reward for capturing all of the unknown. Instead, the Ruins of Alph pairs these cryptic characters alongside unsettling music and bizarre messages from the past, creating a unique atmosphere separate from anything else in the game. Checking my Pokegear's radio and finding that eerie melody is something I could have easily missed, this spooky little detail contributing to the area's ancient intrigue. It invites your mind to creep past what you're seeing on the screen, and ponder what other secrets could be hidden behind these stone walls. The historic village of Asuka, located on the southern side of Nara Prefecture, is a location that I never would have discovered had I not begun this project. This is apparent from the lack of tourists in the area. I saw a few at some of the most interesting locations, but I generally had the day to walk around on my own away from the crowd. Blessed with the perfect weather to explore the tranquil countryside, I arrived at Asuka Temple. Founded in the year 596, around 60 years after Buddhism was introduced to Japan, it was originally a much larger structure. This small reconstruction is all that remains today. It's home to the oldest Buddha statue in the country, originally sculpted in the year 606. This statue, as well as the other creations of sculptor Toribushi, endeared himself to the legendary Prince Shotoku, a figure I highly recommend you do more reading on if you're interested in ancient Japanese history. A short walk east from the temple will bring you to the Asuka Pond Workshop ruins. There was water here until 1991, when the government decided they would reclaim the land beneath and conduct an archaeological survey of the area. Beneath the pond was the remains of a glass and metalworking factory from the late 7th century. Also discovered were 33 copper coins, 6 of which were fully intact. Based on the current historical records, they are believed to be the oldest form of currency created in Japan. I continued my walk south towards our next relic, and while my quiet afternoon was briefly interrupted by the landscaping team, I still got to see something cool. This turtle-shaped stonework was reminiscent of the puzzles you'd find in the ruins of Alph. The water flows into the head and out of its tail. This entire town is like a massive open-air museum, with something historic around every corner. I hiked up through the nearby woods to find the Sakafune Ishi ruins, also known as the Alcohol Boat Stone. Empress Saimei, who ruled as the monarch of Japan from 655 to 661, would use this location to perform fertility ceremonies. Before we move to the last and my favorite relic here in Asuka, I'd like to take a moment to share a brief PSA for those visiting Japan. Unlike my time in Korea, Google Maps is how I navigate my daily life. And Google Maps really likes to route me onto main roads without sidewalks. I make an Eikaiwa teacher's salary, and this project is kind of expensive. I will do anything I can to avoid calling a taxi. This is a quiet historical village, so there aren't too many drivers on the roads, even during midday like this. I wasn't the only one passing through here, and my general assumption is if I see Japanese people doing it, it's probably okay. Please be safe when you're exploring the country.
Thank you.
This is Ishibutai Tumulus, believed to be the final resting place of Soga no Umako, a political associate of Prince Shotoku that helped spread Buddhism in the country. It took over 40 years for this area to be excavated, from 1933 to 1975. As I walked to the lower level, I could actively feel this path calling me in. Underneath, there's an aura of ancient mystery, the exact atmosphere present in the ruins of Alph. I can't help but wish for there to be some secret entrance behind one of these boulders, and I also want to come back someday to see it at night. There are rural areas all over the world, but very few of them carry the history that Asuka does. As I was leaving, I saw a group of young children hitting a rock with sticks, watching bugs pop out. And with the Pokémon games originally created based on Satoshi Tajiri's memories of catching insects as a young child, it's nice to see that even in a heavily urbanized country, that spirit can still live on. Continuing our time in the countryside, some of my Japanese friends had never even heard of Minabe, located in Wakayama Prefecture. In Johto, Azalea Town is the most rural location on the map, surrounded by Union Cave to the east and Ilex Forest to the west. Mimicking this path the best I could, today's journey begins on the Senri coast. Minabe village has very limited options for public transportation, so without a car, I had to call a taxi. Overcast but warm and humid, I started my trek down through this little forest path covered with shrines leading you towards the ocean. It was a quiet Thursday afternoon, far away from the trains and sirens I'm used to hearing in Osaka. As I continued my walk, I crossed over the beach to eventually arrive at this rocky shore. Here at the Mezuzaki Cape, I was immediately greeted by what I think is a hawk circling overhead. There was no doubt in my mind that I could jump over the various streams cutting through the coast, but these are wet, slippery rocks, and I have electronics with me that I'd rather not fall with. Plus, I was watching the FX series Shogun at the time, which made me very aware of how much I don't want to smash my head on a hard rock. While making my way back towards the path I entered from, I gave the taxi driver a call since he'd left me his card. This is the last one I'll call for the rest of the video, a testament to the infrastructure that continues to be a fantasy in the United States. In Azalea Town, Kurt's ability to turn apricorns into special Pokeballs was one of the big features that kept me coming back to the game on a daily schedule. And they all work exactly as intended. Minabe's claim to fame in the real world is their umeboshi production, a type of pickled Japanese plum. With no better place to learn their history and try them for myself, the taxi brought me to the Ume Museum. There was so much information ranging from growing patterns to climate science. What I was most interested in was trying to eat them for myself, so I spent about 1,000 yen on snacks to take back with me. I didn't want to crack them open right away, so I took a stroll through the town towards a small family restaurant, spotting a little dog along the way. I was the only customer inside, and sitting next to me was an old man helping his grandson with some homework. I placed my order, then set up my camera to capture the first taste of umeboshi. I was not expecting it to be that sour. Definitely an acquired taste. After a delicious katsu lunch set, I was back out heading north to hit the last few locations in Minabe. First the Suga Shrine, then the Heisuga Castle ruins. I had to be back at the station on the other side of town for the last train at 6:30, or I was going to have a very unpleasant night trying to get back home. So with about 1 hour of travel time, I made it my mission to get to the end. There are many shrines with the name Suga, and most Google searches will return the one in Tokyo, which you might know from the ending of the movie Your Name. This is not that. Minabe Suga Shrine has been here for over 1,000 years, with people coming to pray for good harvests, successful marriages, and protection from natural disasters. Once I entered, the serene forest atmosphere refused to let me rush off to somewhere else. Every instinct in my body was telling me to forget about those other castle ruins and just sit and take this all in. Why run after something that's been destroyed for hundreds of years? I said before that this journey isn't about visiting places just to check them off like a list. I know I made the right choice. Walking back, doing my best to route myself away from the highway, I got the chance to see umeboshi again, this time growing on the trees. While returning to Minabe's train station, the town's speakers provided some background music. With Golden Week finished and the city going from extremely overcrowded to just usually overcrowded, it's time to explore Osaka. At this point, I'd been living here for 2 months, although some of these places I saved specifically for the video. Osaka has 2 baseball teams, with the most famous being the Hanshin Tigers. The black and yellow jersey and ardent fandom of the character Casey from the Johto anime is a direct reference to this. Tigers fans have a reputation for being a little nuts. Okashi is the word they like to call themselves. In November 2023, I woke up at 5 a.m. New York time to watch them finally end their 38-year title drought with a championship victory over Osaka's other team, the Oryx Buffaloes. This is the food capital of Japan, something that immediately ranks it above Tokyo in my heart. We'll begin in the Tennoji area, south central to the rest of the city. Repping the hometown champs, I started this day with the goal of eating Osaka's 2 most famous street foods. You can find these 2 dishes almost anywhere, although I had my eyes on a little shop called Takuzo. People in Osaka are generally a lot friendlier than what you'd find in Tokyo, and the owner here was interested in chatting with me while my meal was cooling down. I really don't initiate conversations with strangers, but I constantly found myself talking to people in bars and restaurants around the prefecture. This was a good appetizer, but we aren't finished yet. I walked from here up to Okonomiyaki Chiyo, a place recommended to me by a tour guide when I visited Japan after Korea last year. Okonomiyaki is usually made with cabbage, pork, eggs, and flour, then topped with sauce. It's an endlessly customizable and filling meal that's super easy to make on your own. With my onaka ippai, I cut through Osaka Castle Park towards the next destination. Goldenrod City's massive urban landscape does a good job of capturing the vibe, but there will naturally be limitations for a small-scale RPG like this, so Osaka Castle didn't fit in too well with the rest of the in-game city. It's been destroyed and reconstructed countless times throughout its history, whether it's the result of war, neglect, or lightning striking the gunpowder reserves. Unfortunately, I couldn't take pictures of all the cool artifacts inside, but you can get a great view of the city at the top. You can see the famous venue Osaka-jo Hall, where I saw my favorite Japanese singer later on in October. Heading a little further east brought me to the underground shopping centers in Umeda. These are all over the city, and they directly inspired the Goldenrod Underground. It's a natural fit to give the in-game map some more depth, and the type of location that someone familiar with big Japanese cities would easily recognize. Anytime I come here for work, with friends, or travel, I always get a little lost, so I appreciated having the chance to wander around stress-free. There's so much going on down here, an evil lair behind some unassuming door could definitely be hidden in plain sight. Team Rocket has a pretty minimal role in this game compared to the villains of other generations. Their simple goals of theft and power in this otherwise utopian world are made even sadder by their obsession with the past. They're aiming to achieve the dominance they had in Kanto, chasing a false idea of success built on exploitation, instead of moving on and living an honest life. Umeda is one of the city's busiest districts for shopping and travel, and I've chosen to represent the Goldenrod department store with the Daimaru building. You can buy almost anything you'd want here, but I have my eye on the 13th floor. Welcome to Pokémon Center Osaka, the second location founded in Japan. Packed with plushies, cards, games, stickers, and any other Pokémon-branded product you could imagine. I was really impressed by how much variety they had, but I suppose every Pokémon is the favorite of somebody out there. Of course, Scarlet and Violet and its new DLC was the main attraction, though that had some Johto love thrown in too. There were Japan-exclusive arcade games and a special area to play the TCG. The entire floor is filled with some of my favorite Japanese franchises, and it's the perfect spot to clown around with some otaku friends. Heading back down, this whole Umeda area is a labyrinth of pedestrian under- and overpasses. With the sun still out, I wasn't ready to call it a day. The penultimate location of our Goldenrod tour is something I've specifically waited to try for this video. Pachinko is a game that inspired the title of one of my all-time favorite novels, as well as a necessary experience on my Japan bucket list. I don't know how any of this works, but I saw there was a crossover Evangelion and Godzilla Pachinko game. This simple decision is the only thing that made sense about the experience. The staff would not stop hovering over me, which I assumed was due to me filming this. I confirmed with them that it wasn't a problem as long as I don't film any other guests, but they still didn't go away. They didn't let me figure out how to play on my own, so I just twisted the lever and watched the show. The blinking lights, sound of the cascading spheres, and animated visuals were all a little overwhelming, though I see how an assault on the senses could get addicting if you're in it for the money. Something about twisting Godzilla's tail and mashing the Kaoru button gave me another bonus, and when these glorious shining balls finally came to a rest, the guy hanging over my shoulder congratulated me. I couldn't understand how, but I won the jackpot. So you know how in Celadon City, the prize shop is in a separate location from the game corner? This reflects a real-life Japanese gambling law about how cash prizes can't be given out in the same location as pachinko parlors. In the excitement of my victory, I had temporarily forgotten this bit of Japanese legislation, which led to a far scarier exchange than anticipated. Being escorted out of the casino and not understanding why made me feel like I was about to get disappeared by the Yakuza. The staff took me upstairs and gave me my prize, 13,500 yen. I only spent 1,000 to play the game, so it basically paid for my whole day. Our last spot was only about a 5-minute walk away. Osaka's real-world Goldenrod radio tower is a building called Tsutenkaku. The tower doesn't do any broadcasting, instead offering a sightseeing experience that was closed by the time I arrived. If you ever make it out here yourself, The entire Shinsekai area is an essential Osaka nightlife spot that's not as overrun as Dotonbori. Regardless of my pachinko winnings, I am so lucky and grateful to be able to do this. National Park, known in the Japanese release as Shizen Koen, Nature Park, has a relaxing atmosphere that reflects the laid-back vibes of Johto. Outside of the Quick Claw, Dig TM, and Bug Catching contest, there isn't much to do here. Nonetheless, its music has stuck with players far longer than they spent listening to it in-game. It starts with this wistful melody that really takes advantage of the Game Boy's limited sound font, then changes to something more uplifting that pushes you to continue your adventure. Inspired by the real-world Expo Commemoration Park just north of Osaka, this was a necessary stop on our way to the next city. You can see the most striking visual here before you even enter. On this cool, overcast day, I encountered the Tower of the Sun. Designed by artist Taro Okamoto, this shining monument was created for the World's Fair that took place in 1970. Considering how isolated the country has been throughout its history, and the amount of destruction it experienced during the war, hosting a global event like this was a big deal back then. If you're planning on visiting Japan this year, you'll be able to catch Expo 2025 from April to October. It's in Osaka again, but not here. They'll be hosting it on an artificial island called Yumeshima, Island of Dreams. Moving on from the Mega Ultra Chicken at the center of the park, I wanted to familiarize myself with the area, since I'll be here again for the Summer Sonic Music Festival in August. Taking a relaxing stroll through the many dirt paths, I eventually found myself at Flower Hill. This is the vibe I was hoping to see back in Aichi Prefecture. I just needed to wait a few more weeks. I'm thankful I wasn't allergic to any of the flowers here, since Expo Park is only the first stop for today. Once again, we're headed to a city that has specific rules against anything too colorful clashing with the historical backdrop. Until then, you can take a good look at the real-world Route 37. Japan's original capital is less than an hour away, and its direct historical connection to the games make it the ideal location for this project. It's impossible to properly explore Kyoto within a single day, but the visuals and history here so closely line up with what you'd see in Ecruteak. I popped out from the subway to find myself outside the Kyoto Gyoen National Garden in the center of the city. With 22 acres of land surrounding the Kyoto Sento Imperial Palace, this is an extremely popular place for tourists, necessitating tight security. Completely by chance, I was given the visitor number 229, a fun numerical surprise for someone born on the autumnal equinox. This palace was home of the Japanese emperors starting in 1331, until Emperor Meiji designated Tokyo as the nation's capital and moved there in 1868. This coincided with the Meiji Restoration, a massive turning point that saw the end of shogun rule and Japan opening up to the Western world. Deeper into the palace grounds, this is Shunkoden, also known as the Hall of the Sacred Mirror. It originally housed the Yata no Kagami, one of the 3 imperial treasures of Japan, like the sword we talked about in Nagoya. Towards the end of the walking tour, you'll find the peaceful scenery you'd expect from a Japanese garden. This is the vibe I think they were aiming for with the pond in Ecruteak City, as well as the area that would eventually be named Bellchime Trail in the remakes. I wanted to stop by Kinkakuji, the Golden Temple, next. However, since I tried to do both Expo Park and Kyoto on the same day, it was already closed to the public. It features a statue of a phoenix on top, which immediately invokes the memory of battling Ho-Oh atop Tin Tower. Afterwards, to avoid a very unpleasant bus ride, I stopped at a tiny sushi restaurant to pass some time. I've always been very interested in sushi from a young age, mostly stemming from the Lickitung minigame in Pokémon Stadium. Just what type of food could ignite such a reaction in these gleeful gluttons? Much like Asuka Village, everywhere you go is some shrine or temple. And although the imagery of Kinkakuji is closely linked to the rainbow Pokémon, the actual lore of these next 2 locations lines up exactly with the games. If you need a quick refresher, Burned Tower, originally called Brass Tower, was the home of Lugia on the west side of Ecruteak, and Tin Tower was the home of Ho-Oh. Both were constructed 700 years before the hero begins their journey. They stood together for centuries until 150 years before the main plot, when Brass Tower was struck by lightning and burned down. Lugia fled to the Whirl Islands, and the 3 Pokémon that perished in the fire were revived by Ho-Oh and became Entei, Suicune, and Raikou. I've always held the personal theory that those 3 Pokémon were originally Flareon, Vaporeon, and Jolteon, considering the Eevee family's close relation to the Kimono Girls of Ecruteak. The Kimono Girls also have a lot of parallels to the real-world empresses of the previously visited Asuka village, though that is yet another topic far outside the scope of this video. Back to the real world of Kyoto, in the year 796, 2 temples were built. Saiji, meaning West Temple, and Toji, meaning East Temple. These Heian-era constructions stood about 1 kilometer apart from each other, until in 1233, as you may have already guessed, Saiji burned to the ground, never to be built again. There is a very small temple in the surrounding area that's called Saiji now, however, the true former location has been turned into a public park. This was a really peaceful place in the otherwise overcrowded Kyoto, as it's not something that most visitors are familiar with. I took a quick walk east towards the still standing and very popular Toji, which, like Kinkakuji, was closed for the day. It's still visible and impressive even from far away. Showing up in time to represent the legendary birds on the front of the box, this crane jumped into the video. And with the sun setting on this gold and silver inspired expedition through Kyoto, our journey is now halfway complete. Ecruteak marks 4 badges obtained, and Kyoto was the 8th out of 16 total locations I marked for my Johto tour. Moving on to Route 38, the 2 cow Pokémon, Tauros and Miltank, can only be found on your way to Olivine City. That's because Olivine is based on Kobe, a city widely recognized around the world for its high-quality beef. Apologies to these beautiful bovines. Maybe you have some hard feelings about Whitney's Miltank, but Mumu didn't do anything to deserve this. Before we secure these succulent steaks, we'll have to work up an appetite first. Kobe isn't quite as large or busy as Osaka, but it comes pretty close, and I got a tip from one of my neighbors that I should hike north as soon as I arrive at Shin Kobe Station. I was thankfully here on another cloudy day, so it gave me some protection from the heat waves and solar beams I'll be dealing with throughout the rest of this journey. I'm also lucky I didn't encounter any wild boars either. I hiked up to Nunobiki Falls, which fills the air with a cool mist as a reward for those who make it up the trail. This is one of the 3 great waterfalls in Japan, the other 2 being located in Wakayama and Tochigi prefectures. With my stomach also ready to be rewarded, I descended back down the way I came and made my way through the city. When I eventually found a reasonably priced spot to eat, I sat down for Kobe beef in the city that gave it its name. The restaurant itself was pretty small, with easily accessible information about the exact standards of Wagyu. The tasting began with a blowtorched piece served nigiri style, and that was only the beginning of some of the best steak I'll ever eat in my life. The egg yolk in the center came with a big smile on it, which also made me very happy. After trying a few pieces on their own, I decided to mix the whole thing together, and the meal was gone very, very quickly. I wish I still had room for other snacks, because there was great food all over Kobe's Chinatown. When Emperor Meiji opened Japan up to international trade in 1868, Chinese merchants were naturally some of the first immigrants to set up their own communities in port cities like Kobe. It only took me a few minutes of walking through the area to reach Olivine's biggest attraction. Constructed in 1963, the Kobe Port Tower stands at 108 meters tall, and is primarily operated for the purpose of sightseeing and tourism. The entire surrounding area was also clean. There's a level of basic social cohesion that's completely absent in the States. It's commonly accepted that these shared spaces would be better if we kept it clean. Riding up to the top of the tower by elevator is a lot easier than the trainers and floor puzzles scattered throughout Olivine Lighthouse. And up here, there's no sick Ampharos waiting for its medicine. Just a beautiful view of this incredible city. I saw these lights too, although I haven't been able to figure out if they were connected to the tower or part of something else entirely. And off in the distance, I think I could see one of our upcoming locations. Heading down through the lower floors put me right in the middle of these art exhibits, and at the end there was a big wall for guests to sign. I wonder if this little rabbit is still there. I spent some more time walking around the Kobe docks, doing my best to take in the seaside atmosphere before heading home. Throughout writing this script, I've been specifically avoiding a sentence as cliché as, "This city really makes you feel like you're in the game." After all, that feeling might just be a mix of nostalgia and imagination, my monkey brain naturally filling in the gaps in my memory. Still, they found a way to communicate the essence of being in this city through pixels and chiptune. That technical artistry had me falling in love with a city 24 years before I'd ever visit. I didn't know this before writing the script. Our next city wasn't originally included in Johto's map. The cutting room floor, which is a tremendous and important archival of game development, believes that Cianwood City was a late addition in the creation of Gold and Silver. That makes sense if the game is supposed to be based on Kansai, because the real-world equivalent is on an entirely different island of Japan, called Shikoku. In the main story, you have to travel here to find medicine for the sick ampharos atop the lighthouse. This connects to the real-world Otsuka Pharmaceutical Company, with its roots tracing back to Tokushima Prefecture in 1921. They're one of the largest medicine companies in Japan, and they're best known for products like Pocari Sweat, Calorie Mate, and Oronamin C, which were all necessary throughout my year in Japan. I made my way over to where I'd be staying, since this trip was far and busy enough that it spanned my entire weekend. This place is double the size of the apartment I'm living in, but with daylight burning, it wasn't long before I got right back out there. I decided to check out the Tokushima Castle ruins. We've been in so many rebuilt ones, so I wanted to mix things up and show you a castle swallowed back into the earth. The grounds have been open as a public park since 1905 in commemoration of Japan's victory over Russia. I got lucky with a relatively cool, cloudy summer evening. Without the work people put into maintaining these castles, this is what they'd become. As most Nintendo games tell us, everything not saved will be lost. I wanted to grab some dinner afterwards, and I had my eye on the city's specialty. Similar to Kobe's high beef standards, Awa Odori chicken is the pride of Tokushima's agriculture. It shares its name with the region's famous Awa Dance Festival. I got a few skewers at a local izakaya and then headed back before sunset. I enjoyed having some downtime back at the apartment, especially for a full-time teacher exhausting himself almost every weekend to make this project. I got to catch the end of a Tigers game and practice my Japanese reading skills through some classic manga. Protected by a thick layer of Japanese sunscreen, I traveled north from Tokushima City to Naruto, and once again got to enjoy another seaside stroll. I had a quick calorie-mate breakfast, and I firmly believe you can't go wrong with vanilla, chocolate, or maple flavors.
Tasty.
It would have been nice to sit out here for the day, as it was far less crowded than the beaches back home in New York. I'm just glad they had a sidewalk. First, I wanted to check out the Naruto Kaikyo Kahi, a musical stone monument dedicated to Enka singer Godai Natsuko and her single Naruto Kaikyo from 1996. Unfortunately, there's no way I could play this song without YouTube coming after me. Remember seeing Suicune appear in Crystal version and the remakes? Well, on the North Shore outside the city, just like the game, you can find the Aurora Pokémon depicted as part of the Pokélid series of utility hole covers. The location couldn't have lined up any better, and I doubt this will be the only lid we spot in this video. And now, for the main attraction of the day, we'd be heading out from this side of the Naruto Strait up towards Awaji to conquer some whirlpools for real. It took a lot more walking to reach the departure point, but I knew I'd be getting into some cool ocean air soon. I caught a quick glimpse of the previous tour going out, and headed inside to check in and drop off my things in the coin lockers. I have never had a boat experience like this before. We all funneled into the lower level, bunched up tightly in front of the viewing windows. It looked exactly how you'd expect the underside of a boat to look, except with a few distant spirals visible from time to time. When we made it out from under the bridge, they called us all up to start viewing the area's famous whirlpools. It's such a freeing feeling to be out like this. The clear blue sky, ocean breeze, and bridge hanging overhead. At only 2,400 yen, this aquatic expedition is a great substitute for HM06. A few days before I made my trip through Awajishima, I mentioned it to one of my middle school classes. Kotaro, who loves Splatoon, Pokemon cards, and forgetting his textbook, told me that I'd have to try an Awajishima burger. I asked what makes it so special, and he said, "I don't know, you just have to try it." A burger-related mystery in Japan is the ultimate draw for an American like me. And with that, I set off on another adventure through boiling hot highways in the summer sun. There are specific signs that designate non-walkable roads. I promise I didn't see any on this walk. There were no taxis for me to call, and the bus only comes every few hours across the main highway. This was the only way to go to the best burger joint on the south side of Awajishima. I was treated to seeing this spooky old building as well as a gorgeous view of the island below. Alive but dehydrated, I eventually reached my target, Awajishima Onion Kitchen. The pride of Awajishima is their onions, which in my opinion are a welcome addition to any burger of mine. This restaurant has a beautiful view of the Naruto Strait where we saw the whirlpools. You really pay for it too. This is by far the most expensive standard beef burger I've seen in Japan. You can get a Wagyu burger in Osaka for this price. Comboed with some onion rings and a tropical blue soda, it was worth every yen. Hiking through those hills and highways had me very hungry, and I demolished the entire meal in just a few minutes. Thankfully, I didn't get any sauce on the dumbest t-shirt I own. It seemed like the local wildlife was looking to get a taste as well, and after I finished, I made my way over to the Onion Throne. I hope I've made notable onion heroes like Sir Davos Seaworth, Sigmire of Katarina, and the great hero Shrek proud. When I checked the bus schedule on how to get back up to Kobe, I saw I'd be waiting for over 2 hours. I figured if I was gonna wait anywhere, I might as well do it somewhere with this beautiful view, and I used the time to catch up on some new music releases. More than anyone else, I love Sheena Ringo. She dropped a surprise album and concert tour announcement earlier this year, and although it took me 4 lottery attempts, eventually I scored tickets for her show at Osaka Joe Hall in October. I mostly prefer her first 3 albums, with Karuki, Zamen, Kuri no Hana being my favorite. She gives such emotionally vulnerable performances, contrasted against a killer artistic confidence. Although she sings with modern pronunciation, the written lyrics are in a very classical style that can give even native Japanese readers some trouble. Imagine you hear a pop song on the radio, Google what the lyrics are, and it's all like, "Wherefore art thou, ye old English," even though you're hearing it normally. It's just a really bizarre effect that makes delving into her discography like a serious Japanese lesson. For more modern pop music, I'm also into Atarashi Gakko and Wednesday Campanella, both of whom had great live sets at Summer Sonic Music Festival in Expo Park. I also have to give honorable mentions to the late great Nujabes, as well as the band Mass of the Fermenting Dregs. With the sun no cooler than it was before, I begrudgingly began my voyage back to the main bus stop. I couldn't focus too much on the breathtaking view down below because I didn't want to get hit by a car. I wasn't the only one scrambling to safety, as I caught this little friend doing his best to find shade. I cut back through the same terrifying insect-infested underpass and was eventually taken back to civilization. My honest advice, if you're going to visit Awajishima, you're better off sticking to the north side and enjoying the various theme parks instead. Although the view down here was amazing, the onions will be delicious wherever and however you eat them. Passing back through Kyoto towards the northeast edges of our map, I arrived in a city I believe to be called Kouka. I'm a bit unsure, however, because although every online resource calls it Kouka, most of my Japanese friends in Osaka were confused when I mentioned it to them. When I called it Koga, however, they knew I was talking about the town of ninjas. It's a fitting name for the Elite Four's poison-loving shinobi, as the town is covered in references to the ancient art of Japanese stealth. I had hoped to explore the ninja house here, which had an English website. It's clear to me now that I should have given the Japanese website a check too, as it would have revealed to me some relevant information. Information such as, the facility will be closed for a few weeks during summer. Not what I wanted to see after walking half an hour in the sun to get here. Thankfully, I did spot another large ninja-themed building during my walk and decided to go there instead. At the entrance to the Konan Community Center, I found my second Pokelid, this time featuring Greninja. I was just happy to be in an air-conditioned space again, but there was plenty of information and activities for people who were studying Naruto hand signs when they were 12 years old. A plethora of ninja artifacts in a fun, open environment that would be filled with kids if school weren't in session. I'm glad there wasn't anyone else around so I could take my time to get this footage. I got an opportunity to try out my Shuriken form, and hitting the targets wasn't too hard, getting them to stick was the real challenge. All of this weaponry isn't just lethal, it gets points for style as well. It's crazy to think that there were once active ninjas. Imagine being a groundskeeper at the castle, and one night some dude sneaks in and assassinates your boss with a poison needle. The gift shop had a palico from Monster Hunter, and I bought some decent sake to help support the facility. Whether it's Kouka or Koga, the facilities here are worth checking out if ninjas are your thing. North of Mahogany Town is the Lake of Rage, named after the iconic red Gyarados that served as most older players' first encounter with shiny Pokémon. I also think its beta map is really interesting, with the assumption being that this was the town cut when Cianwood was added to the game. There are plenty of different angles you can approach the real-world Lake Biwa from, and I've heard the Biwa Terrace on the east side makes for a great trip. I chose what was most convenient for me coming back from Koga, and that brought me to a city called Otsu. I cut through the side streets and found myself at Sunshine Beach with a quiet family park alongside the lake. I didn't see too many fish, but there were hawks and these giant mushrooms as well. It was nice to just take some time sitting beside Japan's largest freshwater lake, which supplies water to 13 million people across the Kansai region. It's estimated to be around 5 million years old, making it one of the most ancient lakes in the history of our planet. It just wouldn't be Johto without the ice path, although powder snow and blizzards don't sound too bad compared to the summer heat. Bulbapedia's list made it sound like Mount Ibuki would be an easy hike. When I looked into it some more, it seems like you need some real equipment in order to climb it. We can assume that the 8th gym leader, Claire, named Ibuki in Japanese, gets her name from this mountain. There was a sign warning me of one single bear, though the real danger here was the road up the mountain. This street simply did not seem safe. I got close enough to the mountain that I consider it visited for this video, and instead spent the rest of my time walking through the country roads nearby. This family mart gave me a much-needed break, with a cheap karaage lunch giving me the energy to reach my next destination. I've seen a few dragonflies on this trip, only now did I understand why Yanma appear in swarms. Clearly, this is a time of year where this species thrives, and I can appreciate these beautiful open fields regardless of the bugs and heat. Mount Ibuki was a necessary checkpoint on our way to the last major city, although our biggest climb is still ahead of us. Across the 2 screens of the Nintendo DS, my middle school self enjoyed many of Pokemon's spin-off titles, which widely vary in style and gameplay. Dash, Troze, Ranger, Mystery Dungeon. But one that just happened to slip past me is Pokémon Conquest. It's a crossover with the Nobunaga's Ambition strategy game franchise, inspired by the actions of real-world daimyo Oda Nobunaga. Known as one of Japan's 3 great unifiers alongside Toyotomi Hideyoshi and the previously mentioned Tokugawa Ieyasu, the trio was instrumental in ending the Warring States period and restoring a centralized government to Japan. This is a town Nobunaga named himself, which features a golden statue of him greeting all visitors. Welcome to Gifu, the real-world parallel to Blackthorn City. I took a series of local trains to get here from Mount Ibuki, so the first thing I wanted to do was find something to eat. Regardless of my lack of American patriotism, 4th of July back home is still a day of barbecue with friends and family, so I filled that void with some yakiniku. Many restaurants are still cash only, which is a mild inconvenience that always pops up when you least expect it. So I had to be very efficient with my meat and beer choices. I was lucky to find a traditional Japanese apartment for the night that only cost about $25 US. Much nicer than the depressing concrete block I live in back in Osaka. The bath and toilet were in separate rooms, and the owner even had warm water ready for me when I showed up. There were some interesting options on TV that night, including women's basketball and The Butt Detective, although I just ended up resting in the tub for a little before heading off to bed. Doing anything I could to prevent myself from melting in the sun, I started the Gifu tour at Inaba Shrine. When I first saw the name, I thought it had something to do with the hair of Inaba, but after making my way inside, I was greeted by this giant cucumber instead. Inaba Shrine was built over 1900 years ago, although it was moved to be closer to Mount Kinka in 1539. The heat was definitely keeping people inside that day, so I appreciated a less crowded stroll compared to Osaka and Kyoto. After cooling down in the visitors center, I hurried through the quiet back streets to get out of the sun as quickly as possible. It's a shame this heat prohibited me from taking the time to explore the shops and restaurants in the area. Next was the Gifu Daibutsu, or Great Buddha, over at Shoboji. Finished in 1832, it's way bigger than the one we saw in Asuka Temple. I liked the diagram depicting its scale and materials. I was roasting even inside the temple, so I left and went into the first restaurant I saw. It ended up not being a bad choice, and I enjoyed some Chinese food in the air conditioning. The two old ladies at the table next to me told me I looked like Tom Cruise. I tried to let them know I'm just an adventuring gaijin, though they wanted a picture with me anyway and ended up paying for my meal. Energized for the final castle challenge of this campaign, I made my way towards Mount Kinka, which, as the peak of Gifu, makes sense to me as our real-world stand-in for the Dragon's Den. Right in front of the cable car station, they have depictions of all the city's historic figures, determination in their eyes, calling me up to Johto's penultimate summit. I have no fear of heights, and after my ride to the top of the mountain, there was still some hiking left between me and Gifu Castle. Commanded by Nobunaga himself, it's almost like his own personal museum. The real prize is the view from the observatory. Strong winds like what I felt in Hamamatsu were blowing. In summertime, they are far more appreciated. I felt incredible standing above the city like this. All 8 gyms have now been conquered, and I can finally achieve what I came here to do. I thought that's where the footage would end of Gifu, but on the way back down, I spotted a familiar face. The grandmother that paid for my meal back at the Chinese place was on a little walk of her own, and by complete chance, we happened to pass each other at the same time. I doubt you'll ever see this, Oba-chan. Gochusou-sama desu. Descending back into the city, I was able to spot a few more landmarks as I navigated toward the train station. Overall, I think Gifu is a highly underrated spot for tourists. I definitely would have heard about it if I weren't doing this challenge, but I'm glad I got to experience its lore and landmarks as a triumphant victory, paving the way for my final showdown. About a week before traveling to Mount Fuji, I was sitting at work and noticed some interesting repeating kanji on the calendar. I've since learned that there is a traditional 6-day cycle called the Rokuyo that acts kind of like a horoscope. August 7th, the day of the ascent, was marked as Butsumetsu, literally meaning the death of Buddha. It's so unlucky that people will schedule their weddings around it. The 8th was Taiyan, the most fortunate day of all 6. At 5:30 a.m. on August 7th, I woke up with my gear already packed. I signed up to do it with a group right after I got home from Gifu, and scheduled it to line up with my summer vacation. Everyone going met up in Shinjuku first, and we were bussed to the mountain around 7 a.m. Ignorant of the challenge ahead, all I tried to do on the ride was get a little more sleep. Out in the mountains, we made one last pit stop for anyone in need of last-minute supplies. I walked around the shopping center to get some footage, but I was mostly trying to conserve my phone battery. I decided I'd do the whole trip on one charge no matter what, and turn off any wireless signal so that I could be as focused as possible. The thought of how long it's been since I went 24 hours without internet access was not something I wanted to think about. The guides asked us to tie a piece of pink tape to our boots so they could easily identify us. It's not common to go the entire way up in a single trip. Instead, we began at the most common starting line, Mount Fuji's 5th station, 2,000 meters high. As a group, we took about an hour to do a final gear check and acclimate ourselves to the altitude. I used this opportunity to grab a walking stick that starts out mostly blank and can be marked at each station on the way up. With a dense fog already rolling in, we began the climb. Mount Fuji is a volcano, and although it hasn't erupted in hundreds of years, it's still covered in volcanic sand and gravel rather than the usual dirt. This means you can't step into the woods and pee, since liquid doesn't absorb into the ground very well. Out of respect for this legendary and spiritual place, you have to go at one of the stations instead. This costs money each time, and there may be some very difficult climbing sections between bathrooms, forcing you to really consider how you're managing your hydration. Drinking a lot of fluids is necessary, especially considering the altitude, but you don't want to drink too much. The 6th station was able to mark my walking stick for the first time. It's such a fun way to reward your progress, with each burn firing you up to get to the next station. Obviously, pace is the key on a hike like this, something I've struggled with my whole life. I'm good. I watched other people in this group, even ones walking at a slow pace, exhaust themselves and choose to stay behind at one of the lower stations. If you really have to give up, you can pay to spend the night at almost any of them. And I'm not sure how much it costs in terms of money, but I knew the emotional toll of quitting is something I couldn't afford. After an udon bowl at the original 6th station, I felt myself starting to slow down. 2,700 meters high, I wasn't even halfway done, and the air was about to get much thinner. With rain periodically falling, I made my way up the trail, which had more and more large volcanic rocks blocking the way. Some sections necessitated using my hands to safely climb up without slipping. In a brief moment of clear weather, I was able to see the 7th station on the trail ahead. Seeing that, knowing I still had multiple stations left after reaching the 3,000 meter mark, makes the thin mountain air feel heavy, immobile, and suffocating. My body needed the oxygen more than my brain, so there wasn't any fuel for personal reflection during the climb. I'm only thinking about my next step. Move or this ends. You can save your yapping for the video essay. Sometimes I feel like this whole year was a way to hit snooze on the alarm clock of my adult life. I went to Korea, thought that would be my path forward, and now I had to figure something else out. Coming to Japan and making this project was something I genuinely wanted to do, something that could only be achieved in my life at this particular point. And in passing conversations to friends I've met in Japan, I was never embarrassed to tell them I was making this Pokemon-themed project. That's not something I could have done when I was younger. In spring 2010, around the time when Heart Gold and Soul Silver released in the United States, my math teacher told our 8th grade class that we could write a paper for the Long Island Math Fair. The idea of an optional research project wasn't something that particularly enticed me, and to be honest, I really can't even remember why I agreed to do it. 13-year-old Connor Cunningham wrote a middle school level essay on topology. A reckless oversimplification would call this studying 3D shapes, and I'm sure I only knew about it from reading random Wikipedia articles. I wasn't the best math student in my school, but I spoke clearly and could present well in front of others. Thus, I was one of 2 chosen students to present my paper at Hofstra University. I wasn't expecting to be picked, and I was mentally checked out of the whole ordeal by this point. I had a lot going on: Xbox Live, Yu-Gi-Oh! Tournaments, and watching fan-subbed anime cut into 3 different videos on YouTube. I figured I'd show up, talk about my paper for a little bit, and go home. I had no desire to move on to the next round. Kids from other schools showed up with models, PowerPoints, and trifold cardboard presentations to demonstrate their ideas. We were all split up into individual rooms by grade, with myself and about 8 to 10 other participants sitting in a classroom with 2 adult judges. I mostly just dozed off, waiting for my turn so I could get it over with. Some other kid got up there to present on space-time, the 4th dimension. The term has a cool ring to it, so my ears perked up and listened to what he had to say. When he turned to write something on the blackboard, I saw a horrifying vision that spiraled my mind out of control. Clipped to his belt, he was branded with the mark of the beasts. During the presentation, in front of everyone, he was wearing a Pokewalker. Pokemon had not been a socially acceptable interest for years. We are in middle school. We do not wear our Pokewalkers visibly when we go outside. He presented well and clearly did his homework on the subject. That Pokeball was a red and white target on his back. He was judged as if it wasn't even there. I couldn't get past it, and suddenly it was my turn to go up. Who is this kid? Does he wear that to school on a daily basis? Does he know more about Pokemon than me? I was sucked into a psychic vortex of challenged social standards, with this kid at the center, paralyzed in a moment that I thought I didn't care about. It was just me, some flashcards, and a Mobius strip made out of paper in less than 30 seconds. As I was giving my presentation, I could tell it was the worst one the judges would see today. I tried to fall back on a topology classic, Euler's 7 Bridges of Königsberg, In 1736, he explored if it was possible to walk through this city, crossing each bridge only one time. I started drawing this layout on the board behind me, but there are 7 bridges, and I could only remember 4. I stood there thinking, panicking, hoping they weren't realizing what was obviously happening in front of them. I looked at the crowd and met eyes with the Pokewalker kid. And real stealthy, he held his index finger up at the side of his desk where nobody could see. He pointed at my drawing to the 3 spots where the bridges were missing. This is something he had already mastered. I considered this the most humiliating defeat of my adolescent life. He was chosen to advance in the competition. And, like I planned, I went home. The Mount Fuji Hotel is where we'd stop the first day of climbing. Although not as luxurious as the name would imply, anywhere I could rest is much appreciated. The bathrooms still cost money to use, and everyone had to sleep together in these barely separated bunks. Dinner was prepackaged and not interesting. Still, we were atop one of the most inspirational natural wonders in the world. I fell asleep around 9:30 p.m., a necessary measure to be ready for tomorrow's 2:30 wake-up call. On this final climb through the darkness, the members of our group were given a choice. We were all aiming for the summit, but only the most adventurous would be able to achieve this extra goal. If you're able to accomplish 2 hours of hiking in 45 minutes, you could walk around the crater at Mount Fuji's peak in time for sunrise. I thought to myself, you're never going to do this again, so you should go all out. There were less than 10 of us in this group, and we made our way up these brutal, bone-chilling switchbacks that felt endless. I have never been so out of breath, yet so cold. This is where the altitude really started to hit me, and whenever I thought about any potential health risk, especially to my heart, I put another foot ahead of me and kept going. My head hurt, I was falling behind everyone else, but I refused to be defeated. Somehow, I made it to the peak without getting separated. This is the point where the rest of the climbers are going to stop. I sat down to catch my breath. Before I could, the guides wanted to keep going. My most basic animal instinct could not be ignored. I have to stop. I'm not going to the crater. When I asked the guide if it was possible for me to wait here with the rest of the climbers, he said that was for the best, since he could see me falling behind on the way up. And when I realized that this is where it ends, every emotion hit me at the same time. The disappointment only lasted a few seconds, because the next question I asked myself brought all of this together in a way I never would have thought. Does there really have to be more? Can't this be enough? It actually resulted in a completely unique experience from the rest of the group. Since I hiked up faster than everyone else, I had more time to sit there and think. At the end of Gold and Silver, you find the protagonist from the original games, awaiting you for one final battle. If you, the player, were there for the original Kanto adventure, that's you. The grand finale of this story is that you're different now, and you've surpassed who you were before. When I think about that Math Fair Pokewalker story, I see it as something directly linked to every time I felt the need to be different from the reality of what I am. That if I could take every second I spent trying to be someone else's idea of better, or pursue what I thought I should instead of what I want, how much more could I have accomplished in my life? After reaching this peak, it's okay now. I understand that the only reason I'm here doing this today is because it's where my story has brought me. And that is the value of understanding the past, using it to inform and accept where you are now and where time will take you, not blindly following traditions or getting lost in nostalgia. Before heading back down, I got the final stamp on my walking stick. With this, it was complete, becoming the perfect souvenir to remind myself of this journey when I'm old and silver. Every step back down to the Mount Fuji Hotel was 100 times lighter than on the way up, and the vibe amongst the hikers shifted from "let's take this on" to "let's go home." After a quick breakfast, the real descent began. One of the things the guides constantly told us yesterday is that the way back down would be even harder. I think it might just come down to how your legs are structured and whether you do better with inclines or declines. You also have gravity on your side, and although I was pretty sore from the climb, I got down that mountain so much faster than I thought I would. At one point, the trail was covered in volcanic gravel, and I was able to slide down without much effort, almost like skiing on my feet. It was a really cool sensation, and soon enough, I was back down at the forest paths leading to the starting point. I was 4 years old when I first entered Johto, and now I'm 28. To be honest, writing this video, even just recapping what I've done, was tremendously difficult for me. At this particular point in my life, I feel like my ability to process nostalgia doesn't work right now. Before recording footage for this video, I hadn't replayed Crystal since April 2020. It was something safe in a very challenging moment, an attempt to return to a time that made sense. Despite everything I've done, sometimes I can't help but want to go back. That's why I had to create this project. Once again, it's how I move on to what's next. These games are in essence all the same, only slightly varying on what came before. This adherence to tradition is the franchise's greatest comfort, and for kids experiencing their first journey, I can only hope they get the joy and wonder it brought me. But for adult fans, Game Freak's resistance to change is often considered detrimental. Obviously, more development time would have a positive impact on what they can do, but please understand, no new Pokémon game will ever have the same magic you felt when you were a kid. Regardless of how monetized the franchise has become, or has always been, the cold hard fact is that moment is over. And as adults, we are pushed to chase those long-lost feelings by expressing your fandom financially, in a way you probably couldn't during your childhood. Instead, this was something that challenged me, something I like and can be proud of. It's a love letter to time, the process of the falling moon and rising sun. So many Pokémon fans have used their love of this world to shape their own reality, whether it's through art, music, programming, and more. That's how we keep our past with us, evolving alongside it while accepting the changes we cannot stop. I'm back in the United States now, living through this sad, wasteful, and unnecessary moment. The bleak new reality we've been facing this decade is quickly spiraling out of control. Even though I'll occasionally play old video games and watch classic anime, I know nostalgia has diminishing returns, a natural defense mechanism to keep us moving forward. It's a whole new world we live in, a whole new way to see. It's a whole new place, with a brand new attitude. But you don't gotta catch 'em all. Just be the best that you can be.